Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Wok Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today, as you may notice, we're not actually cooking anything because we are once again diving back into our series dedicated to wok cooking basics with a long requested exploration into the fundamentals of stir frying, or in other words, all of the things that I imagine you all are doing in your woks. Now, yes, it is true that there are a lot of cooking techniques that a wok can be used for because of its versatility. I personally love wok frying eggs and deep frying, for example. The stir fry is the technique that probably most benefits from using a wok, and that is because its shape, metal composition, and heating properties all specifically are designed for this purpose. Amongst many things, this includes things like achieving wok hay, high heat flash frying, wok searing, rapid temperature changes, and much more. To pair with this, because again, I imagine this is how most of you all are using your own woks, we'll also be taking a look at how to approach these techniques at home, where your cooking range is often much more limited than a commercial wok range. This of course is going to include things like properly batch cooking over lower BTU ranges, but also generally just how to toss veggies in your wok without, making a gigantic mess. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so kicking things off here first, let's dive into just everything that you should be doing before we even heat up anything on the stove. In Eurocentric cooking, you'll often see this referred to as mise en place, or everything in its place. But you'll find that it's actually extremely applicable to stir frying too, maybe even more critical. Mise en place, or literally to put in place, refers to the process of prepping all of your ingredients before you actually start cooking. We do this as a core fundamental of really all cooking because we don't want to find ourselves chopping veggies and mixing sauces while the literal heat is already on when there is the potential to burn something. This of course is amplified even more with stir frying when your wok temperature is at high heat almost all of the time. In most stir fry scenarios, we have literal minutes before the entire meal is done cooking. So if you suddenly have to put the wok down to go chop an onion, there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna burn something. Those following along with this channel may have noticed that pretty much every Wok Cook video is always divided into two halves, specifically for this reason. The first half of our recipe is always dedicated to prepping our mise en place, with the second half always dedicated to the actual stir fry. Now, if I'm being completely honest, when the camera is off and I'm just cooking for myself, do I sometimes skip the mise en place step? Yeah, absolutely. But I'd only really do this with recipes that I'm extremely familiar with, and I know that there's gonna be big gaps in the stir fry process when I can put down the wok and go measure out a sauce, for example. But if you're newer to cooking, or even if you're just doing a recipe for the first time, I would definitely recommend front loading as much of your prep work as you possibly can, so that once you are cooking, you don't have to divide your attention too much. Alright, so now that we've prepped our ingredients, let's talk now a little bit about how to cook them. This is gonna come paired with the understanding of the specific veggie or protein that you happen to be cooking too. Wok stir fries are entirely centered around timing. Since the cooking process happens so quickly, everything that we're gonna do has to happen in the right order, or you're gonna end up overcooking or undercooking something. Take this Hunan chicken, for example, where you'll notice that our bell peppers are cooking for about 1 to 2 minutes before the onions actually hit the wok. This is because the bell peppers are going to take much longer to cook in the wok to become tender than our onions will, so we give them a nice head start so that we don't end up with an either overcooked onion or undercooked bell pepper. As a general rule of thumb, you'll find that the thicker and more fibrous veggies like broccoli, bell pepper, or carrots will take longer to become tender in the wok, while more tender and delicate veggies like onions, mushrooms, or scallions should be timed a little bit later into the cook to account for their delicate nature. To go along with this, the size and shape of our veggies is also going to have an effect on the way that they cook too. Thinner veggies will have the tendency to cook faster than wider chops, so you'll often see me address this in the mise en place stage too. Take this ginger chicken with broccoli, for example, where we explored the different results yielded from cooking a broccoli spear versus a broccoli floret. The longer and thinner shape of a broccoli spear cooks much faster in a fry, allowing us to simply flash fry it over high heat in the wok, while the wider and thicker floret takes much longer and instead benefits from a par steam before frying. Finally, maybe the one exception that you'll often see me make with this rule is that is that we'll often add delicate aromatic veggies like garlic and ginger into the stir fry very first for about 15 seconds before adding the remainder of the stir fry. But Wesley, isn't that gonna burn? I know you're all thinking that, so no, stop it. This is not a pasta sauce. We're adding these aromatics into the wok early because we want to take advantage of the exposed surface area in the wok. The aromatics of our garlic and ginger release when in contact with hot oil, giving us a more fragrant stir fry with a better foundation of umami. Then we follow this up very quickly, no more than 15 to 20 seconds later, with our next veggie or protein, and with enough motion and a little bit of practice, your delicate aromatics are going to be just fine, and more importantly, a lot more fragrant too. Now, there is a limitation to this technique, and that is that it requires a lot of kinetic motion in the wok to prevent it from burning, which means that it doesn't work very well when your dish involves any kind of searing, which by definition requires undisturbed cook time to encourage the Maillard reaction. So let's take a look at searing next. As a general principle of wok cooking, or really all cooking, the more that we move a wok, the more heat it will release and the lower the temperature will drop. In a stir fry, we can use this to our advantage because we want our cook to happen over the highest possible heat pretty much the entire time to yield a tender but not mushy veggie or protein. Intuitively, you may find yourself thinking, my veggies are burning, I should turn down the heat, which is, well, about 40% correct. Yes, we do want to lower the temperature of the wok, but only very briefly though, because a sustained lower temperature is going to result in steaming, which in turn yields a mushy veggie. We can split the difference here by tossing the wok instead of adjusting the fire, because the kinetic motion in the wok will drop its temperature briefly, while still allowing our cook to happen over high heat. Conversely, in a wok sear, we're attempting to achieve literally the exact opposite result. We're looking for a sustained lower temperature in the wok over a medium heat to encourage our proteins to sear properly. In Eurocentric cooking, you'll often see this referred to as the Maillard reaction, or in other words, when your proteins develop a crust from its contact with the cooking surface. You'll see me do this a lot with things like chicken thigh because it contains a lot of fat, which in turn will render out into the sear. Then once the fat renders and our proteins have seared, we can bring the fire up to high and then toss. You'll find that the combination of rendered fats, high heat, and the lower walls of the wok will allow us to achieve wok hei, or in other words, the smoky flavor and quality achieved from, well, fire. Now, I know, okay, all of you all are thinking, that's great, Wesley, but I live in a tiny apartment with poor ventilation and I don't want to burn my house down. How am I supposed to do any of that? Great question. Thanks so much for asking, Internet. Let's start with the obvious logistical problem here. Your apartment is 400 square feet, you have a 3x3 kitchen space, and every time that you fry bacon, your smoke alarm's going off. I have lived in many tiny apartments over the last 2 decades, and in fact, the kitchen space that I just described was one of my own kitchens. Overhead hoods do definitely help, but if you don't have one, that's not necessarily a deal breaker. Personally, I've found that most residential overhead hoods kind of don't really do much anyway, and actually setting up a decent cross breeze, or in other words, opening up 2 windows that are opposite from each other, will do a lot more for you. I think you'll find that better ventilation will actually do a lot more for you than a mediocre overhead hood, honestly. All of this said, I think flaming the fats in your wok for wok hei is also going to give you maybe the most amount of smoke in your house, so do this with caution, and for whatever it's worth, I've also found that the actual flaming in the wok is not as critical to the smoky qualities of wok hei as the controlled sear is, which should be a relief to a lot of folks cooking over induction or electric ranges because you won't have any fire to do that anyway. Okay, so you've opened up all of your windows, you've got your mise en place, and you're ready to cook, but you just discovered that your range only kicks out about 8,000 BTU. Now what? As a general principle of wok stir frying, we want our wok cook to happen over high heat, pretty much the entire duration of the cook. On a commercial wok burner, we would solve this problem by just sending out as much heat as possible into the wok. Our commercial burners at Wok Cook kick out a whopping 200,000 BTUs of heat. Ooh. On your home range, you're obviously not going to achieve the same kind of heat output, so we use a technique called batch cooking, or in other words, cooking just a small portion of the stir fry, then removing it, then cooking the next portion. Remember kinetic motion from 5 minutes ago? let's review. The more that we move the wok, the more heat it will release, and the lower the temperature will drop in the wok. Conversely, if we stop moving the wok, it will eventually get very, very hot. Anyone that has ever left a frying pan on the stove and forgotten about it, then came back and found a raging hot frying pan can attest to this. It doesn't take very much BTU output to achieve high heat in your wok. All you have to do is just stop moving it. You can absolutely achieve the heat that you need to cook a stir fry on a 4000 BTU range. Proof? Here's the man himself, Yan Can Cook, making a Mongolian beef on a standard range. So, how does this work? Well, the problem is, as your wok fills up and as you continue to toss the wok, your range is going to start working harder and harder to achieve high temperatures in the wok. We can combat this by cooking in very small batches. Take this mugugai pan, for example, where we cooked our chicken, then we removed it, reheated, and repeated with our veggies. Then we combined our chicken, our sauce, and served. This is allowing us to cook everything in the stir fry over high heat, just done individually. This same process works with induction and electric ranges too. It just takes a little bit more patience as you cook while you wait for your wok to reheat. Alright, so last up, let's talk about stir fry finishes, because not all stir fries are created the same. I'll remind everyone, we're really just talking about Chinese stir fries right now because, well, if we didn't, this would be a 50-minute video. I don't know. In your more typical Chinese stir fry, you'll often see sauce elements combined with chicken stock, then cooked briefly over high heat and thickened with a cornstarch slurry, or in other words, cornstarch dissolved in water to prevent it from clumping. There's not really any significant reduction in a sauce like this because we don't want to blanch or boil our stir fry. Mainly, we're just cooking off the rawness of our acids, then thickening. Mugugai pan is a great example of this, but you'll also probably see this come up in a lot of Chinese stir fries. The second sauce finish that I think you'll come across a lot in Chinese cooking is the glaze, which I think you'll find more common in Chinese American food because it's used in fried chicken stir fries so much. In this case, the sauce element will be reduced over heat separately from the stir fry until the sugars begin to caramelize and the liquids have evaporated. In these scenarios, we've reduced the sauce so much that no liquid remains anymore, which means that we can combine it with our stir fry and it won't get too soggy or blanched. You might recognize this from dishes like orange chicken, sweet and sour chicken, sesame chicken, and many, many, many more. We've made just so much fried chicken by now, y'all. The third and final sauce finish that you might recognize, or at least the last one that I can think of, is the reduced sauce, which is essentially a combination of the first two finishes that we just described. In this case, our sauce mixture is created in the same fashion as a cornstarch-based sauce would be, but then instead of thickening it with cornstarch, we're going to add it to heat separately from our stir fry and aggressively reduce it like we would with a glaze. The difference here is that our sauce does not contain any sugar, so it's not going to caramelize as our glaze would, but instead it will just reduce into a very concentrated sauce. Then once we combine this with our stir fry, we end up with this really tacky, thick sauce with little to no liquid in it because of its reduction. A great example of this is the Hunan chicken that we made a few weeks back, which is often made with very concentrated, umami-forward ingredients like fermented black bean sauce because it reduces so well. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope it was helpful or informative or at the very least entertaining to watch. I think we've covered just about everything about stir frying that I can feasibly fit into a 10-minute video. I am very well aware that there are just a lot of topics that we've left out here, but I mean, we had to end this video somewhere. So if there's something that you all are curious about that I left out, leave it down in the comments and we'll dive into it in the next one of these. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice YouTubers, and I'll see you soon.